What's good? It's If Found, and today we are back with another video breakdown. Today I'm going to be breaking down my most recent release, Nite. This is going to be an interesting one. There's actually not a ton of tracks in this song, but there's a lot of little complexities and stuff. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. This is the breakdown for my song Nite Runner. Alright, so jumping right into it, I'm just going to go in chronological order. So, looking at the intro here. And then again, it kind of goes into like a subtle build into the drop. Drop will be here. So looking at the intro, pretty straightforward. Most of what you're hearing is coming from these ambience layers. This first one is, I actually don't even have this one on. That was from another song, but I basically just used a little snippet of the intro ambience from Akira. It's a movie, or it's an anime from the mid 80s, late 80s, early 90s, I can't remember, but so that's all I'm using there. And then I've got this. This is a sample from the Blade Runner soundtrack that Hans Zimmer produced, or composed I should say. And the track on there was Joy, and I basically just sampled a piece of it, and then I think I stretched it out and did like some warping and stuff, and then resampled it again, and this is what we have. I've got a shifter that comes in later, I believe at the build, on the last build, but you can see it's a recurring thing that comes throughout the track. I've got some reverb as like a little reverb throw that gets thrown here and there at the end, and then some very basic EQ. So it's kind of like a nice ambient drone. I've got this little pluck thing, and this particular pluck is really simple. It's from another sample, from a glitch pack that I got, and then I just did some other processing on it. We've got, here we go, got the ST4B giving me a little bit more attack and tightening up those highs. As you can see, I'm like taking off the attack on the highs without it. I wanted to get rid of that high end and keep it really smooth. Old frequency shifter, that's literally not really even doing anything. This LFO, which again I don't think is even doing anything. I think I had it on here and had it mapped to something eventually, but don't have it anymore. Little Valhalla reverb, just give it some cool space, an echo, and then we've got this little wash rack, which essentially just kind of brings it in and out of it's just a reverb and filter rack, and it just kind of pushes it forward and back in the mix. I'm just automating that throughout, so nothing crazy there. We've got, these are our main chords, if you will. It starts out, it's 2 Nexus patches, starts out with just one. This first Nexus patch is, which one is this? It's Beautiful Grand 2, and then I believe I have some high boost on it. Yep, just bringing up some of the highs. Got an OTT as well, and then ST4B. And then at the end of this chain, I've got a tube, which is like a tape and tube saturator, and then an R box, which is basically just like a compressor. Together. So basically just bringing a lot of volume up and also flattening the sound out a little bit. And then to stack with that, That's actually a sidechain trigger, which is going to here, and what it does, it gives me that little flutter or pulse, and I have it kind of basically automating up so that the pulse comes in, but it doesn't really, it's really subtle. It's essentially doing nothing. I had it doing something more earlier in the song, and the song went through a lot of revisions. This particular sound though is just an M1. This is an old synth, or it's like a Rompler, I think. The particular sound, which one is this? Fairy Tales. So just got that happening. Some OTT, EQ, sausage fattener, and limiter. Essentially just pulling out the details a bit, compressing it. A little alter, or a little micro shift. Give it a little bit of stereo effect. Another Valhalla reverb. Again, the entire purpose of this song, or like I wanted the vibe to be very ethereal and like spacey and dark. And so I washed a lot of things out, and then allowed for when the drop to come in, it really hit really hard because it was like right in your face compared to the verses and the breakdowns, which are very ethereal. Little push track, basically just some multi-band compressors. Filter, just taking a little bit of the highs off, and then a clipper at the end. And that clipper is set to like a soft clip mode, so it's well, it's kind of a mix between a clipper and a limiter, but that's why I'm not getting those like digital distortion overs or anything. Some additional texture. I don't know what this is. Oh, it's a meta tune. Basically, it's like an auto tune, but it's a pretty crappy version of it. I used to use this when I first got it. I don't really use it anymore. Some pitch map. Just kind of retuning some of the stuff, but it's really subtle. Vintage verb, snap heap, which I don't use anymore. This is probably doing nothing. Yeah, because I don't really use this anymore. So that was just kind of on there. And then that's the pluck, and I've got a couple things here. So as you can hear, this little pickup ARP. This is just a very basic patch. It's some Virtual Riot preset. I think I might have changed some of it. I'm not sure. Fat Rack, which I'm not using. And then we've got basically some vintage verb. It gives it that space. And then the preset on this, or there's no preset actually, it's just room with long decay. And I like the vintage verb sounds really good. I mean, the room one sounds probably the best. I mean, they all have their place, but I like the room one the most. It's the one I use the most in the vintage verb. And I like to set the size a little bit lower. It kind of has a cooler tone to me. So you see me use that quite a bit. Just taking out some of the lows. I wanted this, again, to be pretty pushed back in the mix. And then I've got a clipper, which is set to like limiter mode actually, so. And then I got this guy, which is doing nothing. Cool. And then this ARP again. So, similar, I think just push up an octave. Excuse me. That's pretty much it for like the melodics of everything else in the drop. I've got a Reese. So the bass going in here, this is my main Reese that I have come out or play throughout the song. So you see there's not a lot of layers. Like this song really was not about layering. It wasn't about stacking up and making it sound like super filled out. It was more so about getting the right sounds and doing a good amount of automation in those sounds to give them a lot of movement and keep them interesting. So if I look at this, you know, we've got a decent amount of automation. It's nothing crazy, but it gives it some movement. And one thing you'll hear is this EQ8 automation. You can see happening right down here. Basically, it's like a filter that's just opening and closing. And I just drew this in by ear. I pretty much was just like, all right, this sounds cool. Close it here, open it there. You could achieve a similar effect by attaching like an LFO. So this is a great way to get some of that perceived randomness. I mean, this would be random, but map this to the frequency and then just let it do its thing. And you can like set it, you know, set that up. It's a great way to, without having to go through and manually draw it, but I just went through and, you know, drew it myself. We've got a couple of things that are going on here. This little sander rack. I believe I've shared this in, so you can hear it kind of, I call it a sander rack because it kind of sounds like it's like sanding off or filing off the sound. It's basically just a like a saturator, but with certain settings on it, and mostly in the color settings. And basically, like, as you just, if I were to just show you this right here. So yeah, just pretty much destroys the sound. But I thought it was cool to mix that with a reverb. So it kind of pushes it back. It makes it more aggressive and bitey, but then also pushes it back. I thought it was a cool mix. Also got this. Yeah. And then the patch itself is an old Reese that I made. This is like probably 2 or 3 years old at this point. So there's a funny story behind this Reese. Me and a good friend of mine, Highland, that's his artist name, but we were out at EDC and we saw deadmau5 and Cascade. It was the premiere of KX5, their like, you know, joint like duo project. And it was the premiere of that at Circuit Grounds EDC. It was like 2 or 3 years ago at this point. And there was one song in the middle of the set, it was like maybe towards the end of the set, that deadmau5 played that was so sick. It had this like really cool visual moment paired with it, but it was this wild Reese, and we ended up like looking up after, you know, like the week after and kind of going on a manhunt to try to find this Reese sound. And we found out it was an Art Bat remix of one of deadmau5's songs. I can't remember which. And, or remix of something. And so him and I both on our own set out to try and recreate like our version of the Art Bat Reese. So we basically like both took a night. I created my version, he created his version. We compared it, and he's got his own version of the Reese, which is a little different from mine, that he uses all the time. And this is the one that I use all the time. So this Reese I've used in like a ton of songs, but that's kind of where this Reese came from, was trying to recreate that one-to-one. Pretty simple Reese though. Basically, I mean, a very basic setup. Just got a basic shapes, one saw, one sine, and then the way it's getting the kind of intermodulation of the Reese phasing is doing 2 unison. There's a couple different ways to do it, but this is the way that I like to do it. But the trick here with this type of Reese is doing the unison, but then making sure the width on the unison is all the way down. And so in Serum 2, you can do this actually right there in the wavetable view. But with Serum 1, you had to go to the global tab and do it, and just turning the width all the way down on that oscillator. And so, as you can hear, if I were to turn the width up, it just pushes either voice out to the stereo, to my left and right channels, but all the way down, and it collapses into mono, and they start to phase with each other. So that's how you get that kind of like super clean modulated Reese sound. And then I wanted to make it a little bit dirtier, so I did a more basic kind of Reese method here, with just unison on a saw wave. That's pretty much it. Got a little bit of noise that then gets pushed into a distortion, and then compressor at the end of it. But yeah, that Reese is pretty simple, but it was a lot of fine tuning just to get the tone just right. As you can see, this EQ here helps clean it up a little bit. So pretty raw, but I wanted to clean up those mids quite a bit, and really makes it sound a lot more expensive, a lot more analog. Kick in there. Looking at the effects going into the build, We've got the build effects. We've got some risers here. I've got 3 or 4 different risers stacked. And they all kind of combine. And then we create a riser there. So I just like stacking these different risers because it creates some more interesting, like they'll kind of come in at different areas and creates a more interesting sound profile versus just one riser, right? And it also just sounds a little more unique versus like, you know, just a single one riser that everyone else uses or something like that. So then going into the melodics for the build, these textures just kind of carry through. Nothing crazy. But we start teasing some of the stuff for the drop. One thing in particular, this is the sub for the drop, but it has like some overtones in it, and then I basically just distorted it a bit more. This is essentially like roar before roar was a thing. But yeah, these are those overtones from the sub. I cut all the sub out. Yeah, so essentially just the sub like there, and then we've got the other basses. This little click, which we'll look at that in the drop itself. We'll look at the sound design, and then the little screech, which again I will break down a little bit more in the actual drop. Looking at the vocals though, let's look at the vocals leading up to the drop. We've got okay, so pretty straightforward. Splice loop. I don't know how much of this I cut out. Yeah, so I basically just chopped these up and then put them where I wanted them. And then we've got quite a bit of effects to clean everything up. Quite the chain, honestly, but if I take everything off.
Think I might just.
Oh, let's put that back on. There we go. So basically just squeezing the vocal a bit, compressing it so it gets, you know, real nice and smooth sounding. Doing that with the UAD, the distressor. I will alternate between this and the LA2A. For this particular sound, went with the distressor. Great plug, or great compressor. Basically just using a preset and dial in the input. OTT. Just kind of squeezing the vocal a little bit more. EQ to clean up the lows. I've got this, which is essentially just a reverb wash and bringing it in so it gets dry. So she's bringing it so the vocal gets drier. Got a Saturn. Again, a little bit more saturation here, but subtle. I like to use the transformer. I think I've talked about this before, but with Saturn, I like to use transformer. A lot of people will go for tube or tape. I feel like transformer, subtle transformer sounds really good on vocals. It also sounds pretty good on a mix bus as well. Just has like a certain like attack to it that feels really good. A little bit of de-essing. You can see we got some catching there, about 3 dB. And that will really, you'll see that here.
Think I might just
kind of catching those, right? And then the rest of this, that's all the tone shaping. The rest of this is really just like a little bit of limiting, but mostly automation stuff. So like delay throws, you know, I've got this here. Little delay throw there with the dub echo. I've got a shifter, which is stuff that happens later. I've got this flutter thing, it's just an auto pan, and it does this. We'll look at that more at the drop, but that's pretty much it. Like just some flutter and redux. Low cut, which happens at going to the third drop. I've got this additional rack here, and it's basically like an echo or delay throw, just another version of it. little bit more saturation that then kind of comes in and out certain parts, also changing the tone in certain areas, and then a limiter, and that's it. And then I have this utility, which is kind of controlling some of that there. But looking at this, I mean, you can see how much automation that happens here just on this one vocal between all these different plugins. And I think that's what helps bring this song to life, because there aren't a lot of different tracks here. There aren't a lot of different layers. I just tried to use like really simple elements, but then make them move a lot and bring them alive with different effects and things like that. And so as you can see, that's what's really going on here. The vocals going into the build. So one thing I'll say that's a cool little feature that I really like is going into the vocals. We've got this little click thing, and it's just basically one of the vocals reversed, but it sounds really cool because it catches like the click of something she said, but it's on beat, and then it has this delay throw with it as well, and I thought it sounded really nice. So just like a little bit of ear candy. Something here. And then these are just chopped up from the vocal, and then, you know, copied through. Again, Metatuner, basically the same thing as like Autotune. Got this guy. This carries, this is again chopped from one of these vocals, and then a little bit more processing on it. And then that carries to the drop as well. And what's going on with all that, I've got a shifter, which is in parallel, shifting up. I've got this redux, which is giving me that like the breakup sound, just putting it at 2 bits, and then having the dry wet filter up. Just kind of a cool sanded down effect. On a filter, just open up a filter. Dub echo. Okay. Pro MB. So here I'm side chaining it essentially to C bit. Where's that? 34, 31. Oh, so to the main vocal essentially. There's a lot of automation lanes. So this vocal gets side chained to the main vocal, which is track 31, and it comes in like later here during this build. So just making sure that I'm making room for this vocal. So that's all that's happening there. Cool. Let's see. And then we've got this little build. I want it to be really subtle because I wanted the drop kind of to just come, at least the first drop, to just kind of come out of nowhere. So this little subtle kick here. One cool interesting thing is I'm actually fading the transient out. So it starts out as really like a soft kick, and then it gets sharper as it comes in. So doing that with the fade in function here on the sampler, on the simpler I should say. A little bit of, that's all that's really happening. I've got the shifter doesn't really kick in until after it's muted. That was something I took out later. Low cut, just to sweep the lows a little bit, and that's pretty much it. I mean, very simple kick setup there. All this extra stuff is stuff that comes in later. You'll see it with like the techno drop and all that is where I have some more automation. The drums, this is a cool little thing. This is a resample of the techno kick, and then I just have it kind of sucking back into itself. But I wanted the transient to be like as part of the reverse, but not as part of the downbeat, which is kind of weird, but it kind of creates this weird, like, I don't know, negative suction effect. It's kind of weird, like. Cool, and that's that. But anyways, let's look at the drop. And going into drop 1, we'll look at the drums first. So here we go. Cool. So the drums are really simple in this, especially in drop 1. Drop 2 and drop 3, they get a little more complicated. But drop 1, I wanted it to be very sparse. So we've got our main kick here, which is an old trap kick of mine that I made. I've got a little bit more processing, got some EQ. Without the processing, you'll see this is what we got. So it just rounds it out a little bit, feels a little bit less boxy, taking out some of that like 400, 300. So yeah, 400 area, just making it a little bit less boxy. Some glue compressor, basically acting as a transient shaper. Just giving it a little bit more click, a little more punch, sharpening up the kick a bit. And then drum bus. Just kind of, I don't know, gives it kind of squashes the kick a little bit, but it gives it a little bit more character. Feels a little less sterile, so I like to use drum bus for that. And then this clipper, which isn't really doing anything, just kind of hanging out and catching peaks. And then a Pro Q3, which is catching the transient on that snare, because I had realized in earlier versions of this, I did not have that EQ, and that snare was really pokey. I've played this song out many times, and early versions of the song would see some people kind of wince a little bit when that snare would hit, like people in the in the front row of the crowd. So that was definitely my cue to be like, all right, let me tuck that transient or that harmonic down quite a bit. The snare here, we've got, this is a snare, this is an old snare of mine, but you've probably seen it in my other videos. I've used this snare a lot. I'm not really using it much anymore, but it's essentially, I've talked about it in my other videos, so you can go check out how I made that snare in those. I can't remember which one. I think maybe Worth the Crash probably talks about how I made this snare. But essentially it was a Vital thing that I made, and then I have like 1 or 2 other layers. Actually, it's just the Vital one in this case. And that's pretty much it. It's just some extra processing, Trash 2, and then EQ to help kind of pull out some of those harmonics. Pretty straightforward. And again, Worth the Crash, check that out. That's where I go more in detail on how I made that snare. So that's the snare. And just a reminder, this song is like, it was basically a work in progress for over 2 years. I just kind of added and changed things throughout the course of those 2 years. So there are elements of this that have been around for a while. That snare is one of them for sure. That was one of the early first things in this project. All right, so that's mainly the kick and the snare. There's nothing crazy going on with the processing. I got this cool little roll. And basically just doing a little uptick here. What's cool about Ableton, if you didn't know this, you can do a ramp function. So say if I go ahead and drew like all these in, but I wanted them to crescendo up, I could ramp down. So starting at 1 velocity and going up to 127 if I wanted to, right? So just a kind of quick thing so you don't have to manually draw that in. It's a nice little feature. And then looking at the top loops, very simple. We've got the good old Allison hat too. I use it on like everything. And then Barely Alive closed hat. Some fresh air. Boost the highs a little bit, and a saturator to clip everything. That's it. That's, yeah, nothing else. No effects, no nothing. So very simple. So let's look at the melodics. Actually, we'll go in order. We'll look at the vocals next for the drop. There's not really anything going on. It's kind of a carryover from what you were hearing in the drop. Just as basically like a drone repeating. And I'm just automating in different amounts of distortion and then turning it on and off with the utility automation. So yeah, nothing crazy there. I've got this little guy here, which is kind of like a little shout, but just squashed a lot with the Fat Rack. And then we've got, I didn't talk about this, but this is a sample that I just kind of chopped and screwed a little bit. This is what the raw sample sounds like. And then I did this. So very similar, pretty similar. I just chopped like one little other part here. Put some kind of light OTT on it, and then a clipper. That's it. I thought it sounded cool as is. Kind of have another version of that here. And that's got like this little cool glitch thing in here. And then we got the vocal that comes back in here. And then with here, where I'm getting that flutter effect is with an auto pan, and then just setting the rate high to like between 19 or 23 hertz or around that area. Without it. So it's just kind of like a cool flutter sound. And then I've got like little weird chops and stuff like that on the vocal shouts. And then we've got little like interspersed little vocal chops that kind of do little weird pickups like that. And you got this one. So and processing on this is simple. It's essentially a little bit of alter boy, EQ, and some echo. So pretty straightforward on that. Let's look at the meat though. Let's get into the good stuff. So the kind of like the melodics, the bass sound design here. This is where this drop is more interesting. So we've got our first hit, which is a donk that I made, or actually it's a preset that I kind of modified a little bit. But you can see the processing is very simple here. I could have probably done more, but it worked. But the sound itself, I believe it's what, a little bit of, not even FM, just pulse width and saw wave, and pushed through some distortion. So, and then the phaser gives it a little bit of that like amp sound effect. Really subtle. And then we've got this little ivory sample that I chopped up. So pretty simple. Basically just a hit, this little sample, so boom. And then we've got the balance between these guys here. So this little first hit, this is paired with that donk. This is another ivory sample. I just kind of threw it to a simpler and picked it here, put it in warp mode, so that it kind of gives it some weird texture when it actually like breaks apart. When you stretch it, it kind of breaks apart. Sounds pretty cool. And then I've got a rift on it without that. Just kind of gives it a little more soft. And then clipping. That's pretty much that. It just kind of jumps around. And then I've got the response, which is a screech. Without the processing. So it just really flattens the hell out of it. I think the rift is doing the bulk of this. Yeah. I'm just basically squeezing it really hard with the rift plugin. And then we've got this pluck here, which is a serum preset. And it's like some like percussive thing that I thought it sounded really cool. And then I just put a bunch of processing on it. Got a little bit of transient shaping here. Pushing those attack up. This little spectral thing. It just gives it like a little bit more metallic texture. It's not much. Kind of that push rack again. A little bit of soothe. This is what that looks like. Just catching some of those mids. Again, I want it to be very present and like in your face, but I don't want it to be like painful to listen to. So I use soothe a decent amount in this project for that. Wash. not really doing anything. It's just filter and space, and I don't really even use it in this, it looks like. Dub echo, again, not even using it. And then just like a clipper, basically. And then I've got that. So this is essentially the sequence, right? And then it just kind of bounces back and forth between those. And we got a couple different, like this is probably an old preset or old sound that I had made and I just resampled it. I don't know where it came from, to be honest. It sounds like something I made, but yeah, that's what that is. Cool. And then I've got this little, this is me literally just beatboxing into my iPhone microphone and then throwing a little bit of processing on it. It's got a gate, and then like basically a channel strip, which is doing some EQ and compression. A little bit of room reverb, ST4B, and then a bunch of saturation, but without it. It's funny, the sub from the song is actually in the recording. You can hear. Yeah, I literally just recorded it right in front of my speaker as it was playing, and just like right into it. I didn't care. But with the gate and some of this other stuff, it kind of worked out. So. Gives it a little bit of texture, right? So it kind of gives it a little bit of percussive stuff going on there. That's pretty much it. So that's like the kind of like the bass sounds and little donks and stuff. But I think the most interesting thing in the drop is got to be the sub, especially in drop 1. And it's really not complicated. It's just more so intentional. With the sub itself, I basically split this into 3 different sections. So I've got my fundamental, which is just, as you can see here, fundamental, second harmonic, third harmonic, and a little bit of intermodulation from distortion, but it's essentially just these 3 components that are making up the sub. Now I have the same thing that I still do the same thing, but now I have a sub rack that I use with Operator. It's a little simplified, but this was like me figuring this out like a couple years ago, and this is just how I did it the first time around. And so what I was doing is using Serum, and I'm basically swapping between oscillator and oscillator A and oscillator B at certain sections. So oscillator A, this is the first one. Oh wait, I guess I'm using both technically. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, so in this one, I'm using oscillator B first. So this macro swaps between the 2, and as you can see, for the second half of the drop, I go to the second one. So the first half of the drop, I'm using oscillator B, which is a simple sine wave. Second half, I'm using oscillator A, which is sine wave with a third harmonic pushed up, and then creates this shape. So I'm just basically bouncing between those 2. That's the fundamental. So how that sounds on its own, just a pure tone fundamental sine wave. That is a little bit of saturation coming from being limited, essentially. And I've got a little bit of compression going on as well, which is going to pull out some of those overtones. So, but otherwise it's a pure tone sine wave. Then I add this harmonic, which is just, 4th order, 3rd order harmonic, I don't know. But that's this guy right here. And again, some of that saturation is not getting pulled out. And then we've got the high harmonic, which is right here. And all together. box kicks in the second half when I have the wobble. So this MIDI is what's triggering that. This goes into the shaper box and triggers this shape. So the actual eighth note wobbles is coming from the auto pan, but it's not happening on the fundamental. So the first hit, as you can see, the fundamental stays steady, and then it starts to wobble, and then it comes back steady again. So it's a little bit more interesting movement there as well. And you can see that here I'm doing this LFO wobble on the mid and high harms, and then it kicks in on the low harm, or the low fundamental there. So just kind of an interesting thing going on there. It creates a little bit more movement, more interest in the sub. So that's what's happening with that. That's pretty much the sub for drop 1 though, but that's, yeah. So like I said, simple but still technical. You know, there's a lot, it's very intentional, the movement of everything. You know, the big inspiration for this song was going to a lot of live shows, seeing the way my music affected people, like being played out, and like which tracks would hit, which tracks wouldn't, and then wanting to make something that would make people really feel like, oh, what the hell was that? And I found that doing that through subs was a lot more effective than just like trying to make a crazy growl. Because growls are cool, but like it all just kind of becomes noise at the end of the day. Whereas with this, you're physically moving people's bodies with this. Like, you know, you can feel on a big system this wall of air vibrating you differently, especially when you have movements like this, right? And more complex movements here. So I was experimenting with that, and I've played this song out many times, and would get the reaction I was hoping for. So that's kind of what the inspiration behind this song was, really. I showed you everything else that was going on with fundamentals and swapping fundamentals and kind of, you know, doing the flutter and the LFO movement and all that, but I did not show you the pitch bends. So basically, I like to set my subs to like 24 plus or minus. It gives me a lot of room to do pitch bends. I go into Ableton, go to envelopes, go to MIDI control, and then go to pitch bend, and you can do a lot of cool stuff here. So, and the way I like to look at this is I like to make these pitch bends. I like to listen to them by ear, but also feel them. But one thing I love to do is watch how they react on analyzers, because I know what the effective sub range is for most club systems. I know if I go above 65 hertz, it'll still hit, but it'll feel really chest oriented. Like it won't really hit you in the gut like I want the sub to feel. The sub will feel a little weaker. And depending on where you are in the room, it might not hit at all. So I know that I want to keep it, in most cases, if I want like a very present sub, I want to keep it between probably like 65 hertz, 75. I don't know why I was saying 65, like 75, 80-ish at the most. But I really want to get down into like the 40 range. I want to keep most of the sub down in the 40s, because that's like your deep sub area. And you can see I'm resting here around 36. This is about as low as you want to go. Anything lower, so like a C sharp, tends to be a little too low, kind of rolls off on some of the smaller club systems. But D will pretty much hit, like a low D will pretty much hit everywhere. So this is about as low as you want to go. But you can see my pitch bends. I'm starting up here at around 50 hertz, and then rolling down, and then I have it kind of intentionally roll down below what the ideal minimum range is. So in my head, I know that the way this is going to feel to someone is the sub is going to feel like it drops off envelope wise, like it's like going to kind of disappear and then come right back. So I'm playing with that knowledge there. Like I'm trying to make sure that people are going to feel that. And I like to look at the analyzer for this, because I know my sweet spot is here to about here. Like I know that's my sweet spot. So I know I'm watching the movement here, the fundamental, and making sure I'm kind of like around that area. So you can see that's where I'm playing around here. And so that's how I decide how deep to go on some of these pitch bends. You know, I could go higher up here, but then it's going to kind of move a little bit more outside of the range that I wanted. And so this is all like to your discretion, right? You can change this depending on your song. And then we bring some of that kind of auto pan flutter stuff back, or the LFO stuff back. All right, looking at the effects for drop one, very simple. It's just this. Just a subtle laser filter in the background. Cool, let's move on to the second part. And the second half of the song, we start going into a completely different vibe. Not completely different, but new drop, all that good stuff. So then we get into the techno drop, which is going to be very few elements are shared. I don't think anything is really shared in the techno drop. It's a whole new thing. Going into the second break before that,
Think I might just,
vocals are the same here.
think I might just,
We just don't have the washout and the reverb. But the interesting thing is this that comes in here. This is actually, what's interesting about this is this was an element that got added later into the song, and I did not know what to do with this song. I had a bunch of different melody ideas that I tried out, and they were all too structured. I didn't want something that sounded like I was making like a whole song. Like I just kind of wanted a vibe, if that makes sense. I didn't want a whole progression. I didn't want to do all that. It felt like it was trying too much for what the song was. And so ended up going through Splice as like a fallback resort because I was at a loss, to be honest, and found this, and I was like, it was like in some trance pack, I think, and it was just like, this is it. This is exactly the vibe I'm looking for. And I threw some supporting stuff in there, obviously. And I believe there's actually another. Oh no, this is actually my melody. But got it. So like I knew when I heard it, I was like, this is the exact vibe I want. And then I threw this little counterpoint in here to kind of give it something, but again, didn't want to do chords and all of that because I didn't want it to be like a whole thing. So I think the cool, interesting thing about this break section is the amount of restraint that I showed here, and not going full production on this. Like I could have definitely done like full chords, maybe even some like additional drums, and like really kind of produce it out. But I didn't want that. I wanted it to be minimal and keep a certain vibe. We've got little arps that come in here, really subtle, just like a little riser arp. It just kind of wobbles up and down slowly. So we've got this little guy which comes in now. This is pretty much just in the techno section. Thought this was a really cool sample. I actually need to save this and use it again. But it's just a cool vocal sample with the. So I mean, it's all pretty much in the sample. That's pretty much all that's happening. It's just a sample with a little bit of OTT, and then it goes into that. Looking at the bass here, pretty much just. Oh, actually, this is still the. So just previewing again, using some of the same elements from the first drop, trying to keep it cohesive, even though it is going to a whole like new type style of drop. So same type of build elements I used for drop one, but yeah, cool. And then looking at the sub going into drop two. So with this, I'm pretty sure Oh, that's actually not being used. It's this one right here. So this is just that same Reese from the intro. Same Reese from the first build. Doing the same thing. So like I said, nothing crazy. Looking at the effects, same risers, literally the same, copy paste, but it just worked. Again, I did that intentionally because I wanted to feel cohesive, even though it's going into a completely different style drop. So I use the same risers, same elements. And then looking at the drums, this is where we start teasing those techno drums. Looking at the kick here, basically just the techno kick, which we'll look at the drop. I band passed it, or bounced it and then band passed it, so that's the kick itself. And then just doing some weird effects to kind of get some interesting riser stuff out of it. So got reverb, got a low cut, got this little washout thing that is from a Virtual Riot thing. I think it might be from his Patreon, like from a while ago. I haven't subscribed to his Patreon in a while, but he's got some great stuff. But it's an old like washout effect rack that he had. I use it quite a bit. This one and like one other one. Essentially the same as Endless Smile or similar to it, and I still use Endless Smile as well, but I just like this. And then I get a little Saturn, which is creating that little smudge effect. Feels like it's getting like smudged out, so I like using that as like a cool additional effect. Techno hats, real simple. That ends up being a filler loop for the techno drop. I have other cymbals that I use that you'll see. Basic 909 snare. I kept it pretty low pass. I actually didn't even open the filter on this until I didn't open the filter at all. So I kept it really cool. Yeah, and then the vocals are all the same. The only difference is this vocal stretch thing, which is the same from this, but I just don't have it playing. I just kind of kept it going here instead of cutting it off like I did in the first drop. Cool, let's look at the drop. Techno drop. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple stuff. We'll look at the drums first since that is the meat of this drop. We've got, this is the core techno kick. Together it layers with the rest of the kick. So this is the middle. I don't know why I split it up like this. I guess I decided to do it this way. But I have the mid kick, or like the meat of the kick is here. I went through, these are just routings. So basically these like, it's so that it side chains other things to the kick. And I'm not even using any of them. Some of them I am, but it's like side chaining certain drums to the kick. There's just a lot left over in here because again, I tried a lot of different things out. This is the sample. I kept it pretty bare. No processing. I wanted a bit more of that like throaty dance kick sound, so I pushed it a bit with a riff and drum bus. Very subtle, but kind of gives it a little bit more character. Looking at the other kick, this is the top like transient part. It's like the click and then the rumble. Again, I don't know why I split it up this way. I just kind of did. This is kind of interesting. The kick click here. I've got two different kicks. I've got an ISO kick. I literally just like sampled an ISO kick from some song. I don't know which. I'm just using the transient. I really liked it a lot, but I'm pushing it a lot with the roar. Just kind of in the mids. Not doing too anything. And then I've got a solar kick. So you can hear the ISO kick is just that initial transient. The solar is the rest of it, without the ISO with it. So they complete each other pretty nicely. And then I've got some EQ to kind of clean them up and everything. So that's what's going on with that. And then the rumble, it's another sample. I've got a little bit of saturation on it, just kind of make it a little more interesting. With these Fender rumbles, sometimes these samples are in stereo. They like to get a little wonky with them. I wanted to keep everything mono, so I collapsed it to mono. And then took out some of the low mids because I didn't need it. But as you can see, I've got this nice little rumble. I think at one point I had compressed it more to kind of level out the low end, but it felt flat when I did that, so I kept it pretty uncompressed. I've got a little bit of gain reduction on the limiting, but that's about it. This is what you were seeing with those things in the other kick. This is getting sidechains to those kicks. So together we've got these two kicks all together, and those are getting sidechained, or the rumble's getting sidechained to this mid kick. All right, let's look at the up hat. This is our main techno hat. We have it here. I think I even have a layer in here somewhere. Here. I've got a couple of different hats that come in. So one, I spent a lot of time getting this hat right. Even though there's not a lot of processing on it, I spent a lot of time finding the right hat, making sure it's exactly the one I wanted. I went through a lot of different 909 style hats. This is the main hat. A little bit of drum fattener on here and some clipping. And this is what it sounds like without it. Throw the decap on it. Really squeezes it a bit. And then I'm just clipping it basically to hell and back with the drive. But yeah, nice and snappy, right and present in your face. I want it to be pretty aggressive and all that. So that's the kick there. Clap. Simple, just a simple techno clap. Nothing crazy. Now the way I'm maintaining that transient is I am sidechaining a lot of these things to each other. So the kick trumps everything in this techno loop. All the cymbals of the hat hits everything. The initial transient, like a 16th, is essentially getting sidechained to that kick. So look at like the clap, right? Really quick, I'm just taking out that initial transient, but it's getting sidechained, from essentially this guy. So this is sending to the clap. So I'm making sure that the only thing playing when that transient hits is the kick transient. That's what keeps it very clean, and there's no phasing, no modulation, nothing. So it hits the same way every single time, exactly how I want it to. So that was like, spent some good amount of time getting that just right. And then that's pretty much it. The full techno loop with the drums. This is where that new hat section comes in. Got the open hat here, which is sidechaining, I believe, something else. What is it? It's sidechaining the other cymbals. So this here, these cymbals are getting sidechained to this hat. There's a lot of interlinking sidechaining going on in this song. So these up cymbals here are getting sidechained, or sidechaining this hat. So like this is ducking to these cymbals. As you can see, I do it with an external instrument rack, which then sends to 11, which is here, and sends to the shaper box, which is ducking the transient. Without it, it's ever so slightly a touch cleaner. Super subtle, but like all those little transients and layering these cymbals, they will stack on each other very quickly, and they will really mess up your high end and kind of sound really harsh. So that's why I wanted to be very surgical with this particular sound. So all together, very crispy, very tight. Make sure my word moves on beats. techno drums. I mean, and then just, you know, playing with the kicks here and there, doing some more interesting stuff. Like you got... These are actually a lot of fun to program. It's just having fun with like different kick patterns and stuff. Just to keep it interesting. Cool. That's the drums for the techno section. And as you'll see, some of these drums do carry over to the third drop, because the third drop is kind of a marriage of the trap and techno drops. Let's look at what's happening in the mains let's look at the vocals for second drop. That same drone, nothing different there. Again, these are the same things that we were doing in the first drop, so I'm not going to go over them. And then this is like the post drop where I bring the vocals back. Just to kind of carry them. Now, the original version, I opted for like a full breakdown here and didn't have the techno drop carry through. But I feel like in true techno fashion, I needed like a good 32 bar drop, like something that was like plenty of time to fully like be in the moment, you know. And so I decided to carry these full drop techno drums all the way through to the next build with the vocals. So that was kind of like to keep the energy up. But looking at the main drop here for drop 2, this is what's in the main section, the melodics. Got those main synths still. And then I would say if there is a lead, this is the lead in the drop. That's that little vocal thing from before. Pluck thing that kind of carries throughout, that was introduced a little earlier. But yeah, this whole section is really about fluidity, so keeping everything fluid, cohesive, and not anything like crazy. I didn't want to do a lot of crazy cuts or fills or anything. I kind of left that up for the kick to take all the weight, or to do all the heavy lifting for that. No sub. I had experimented with a couple different subs, like an upbeat sub. Actually, that's the wrong, but yeah, I experimented with a couple different style subs, and they just never worked. So that was that. I tried this as well. Oh, I guess hold on. Like I had this little brassy thing with it, but it didn't hit the way I wanted to. So ultimately, just relied on the rumble. But as you can see in the low end, that's not supposed to be playing. We got plenty of low end on here, so didn't really need anything more than that. The kick is the main driving force anyways, so let that do its thing. Alright, so going into this post drop, we start bringing it back. This is like a post drop / build. It's kind of interesting how this kind of falls off and falls into a build. But I started bringing back some of the original elements from earlier in the song, kind of tie it all together. Got the art from earlier. And this is where we kind of drop the techno loop, or at least part of it. Kill the kick. We've got a little sub down here. And then we start introducing the main sound design element, I'd say, of the song, which is the... Cool. Let's look at the drums first. Alright, so that'll do it for the breakdown for Night Runner. If you are watching on YouTube and you want to check out the full breakdown where I look at the drop 3 sound design, so the acid lead, how I made that from scratch, the bass and sub design, and also the drums for drop 3 as well as the mix and mastering chain on this song. I do also talk about that at the end. All of that is in the full breakdown video, which is on my Patreon. If you subscribe to my artist tier, you also get this project file. So as you see it, literally with the master chain, all of that packaged and saved for you to do with it as you please. For all my Patreon members, thank you so much for your continued support. It means the world to me and really helps me every month with, you know, little things here and there. So let me know which song you want me to look at for the next breakdown. If you have any questions on this song, don't hesitate to ask. Let me know down in the comments below or over on Patreon, and I'll make sure to get to it. All right, thanks guys. Peace.